Hey guys, History Dumb Down here, back with another video. I'm a man of my word. Here's the diorama I made with food. This is what I'm going to use to explain the Battle of Teutoburg Forest to you all today. I'm very excited. This took me a while to make. It's not the most beautiful diorama, it doesn't put Da Vinci to shame, not even close, but I'm actually weirdly proud of it. I'm going to remember this. So before I get into the context and the actual battle itself, I just want to give you guys a quick synopsis so you just understand some of the important figures. So obviously the Battle of Teutoburg Forest was fought in 9 AD during the reign of Augustus in Germania, so obviously modern day Germany. Involved the Roman army, right here the Romans being represented by these yellow Lego bricks, led by Varus, and they were defeated by an alliance of Germanic tribes led by Arminius. And it was a completely humiliating Roman defeat. The Romans lost 3 legions, and it actually not completely changed, but it played a big role in changing Rome's view of how they were going to fight in Germania and whether or not they actually wanted to make Germania a province. And also, Germania not becoming a Roman province also changes the history of Europe as well. So yeah, that's the quick synopsis done. Let's move on into the context. Actually, I need context. I just always think about that meme of the guy with the fedora hat pointing, need context. I'm a big context guy, though. I'm a detail-oriented guy. I try my best. So I'm going to try and do a deep dive of this context. It's fun. I like yapping about history. So anyway, the Battle of Teutoburg Forest actually is like a smaller chapter of a much larger period of history that lasted 28 years of just straight up Roman invasions in Germania. Like, Teutoburg Forest is like the most famous part of it that we know of, but so much stuff happened after and before, and I'm going to cover that in this video. So what happened before, right? So we can all trace it back to 16 BCE is the origin point. The Clades Lolliana, otherwise known as the Lollian Disaster, was a battle where a group of Germanic tribesmen ambushed a Roman army by crossing the Rhine, and it was a humiliating defeat for the Romans. They lost an eagle, and obviously Augustus wasn't very pleased by this. So Augustus himself actually goes to Gaul, starts organizing the Roman army, and he starts preparing them for an invasion of Germania. They're going to cross the Rhine, basically. And so Augustus, to really make sure that this is a success, appoints a guy called Drusus the Elder to lead this invasion. Now, Drusus the Elder Drusus the Elder, some background about Drusus the Elder. He's awesome. I love this guy. He's so cool. There's an interesting historical figure. He's related to all these important figures in Roman history. He's the stepson of Augustus. He's the brother of Tiberius. He's the father of Germanicus, who I'll also discuss more in depth later on in the video. He is the father of Claudius, the grandfather of Caligula, and the great-grandfather of Nero. So anyway, beginning in 12 BC, this is the first incursion, right? The first Roman campaign in Germania. Drusus the Elder crosses the Rhine. He campaigns for 3 years until 9 BC. He's the first Roman general to reach the Elbe River. He is immensely popular amongst his men. They build the Drususstein to celebrate him. It's like this column, like this funerary memorial type of column, and you can find in modern day Germany. And he also would literally fight Germanic chieftains in one-on-one combat, and he would like kill them and loot their armor and like keep it as like a trophy. So he was like full on. So Drusus the Elder was a full on baller, badass. I love him. And then he died by falling off his horse in 9 BC, the same year he reached the Elbe River. So yeah, pretty anticlimactic ending. He was 29. He's a big what if. He's kind of like the Derrick Rose of ancient Rome to some extent. Derrick Rose, Brandon Roy, Dele Alli. Who else is a big what if in sports? I'm trying to think. Johnny Manziel? No, not really Johnny Manziel. No, he's not Johnny Manziel. That's disrespectful. Drusus the Elder. I'm sorry. Anyway, moving on. So after Drusus's unfortunate, and whatever happened with Drusus, anyway, after Drusus died, he gets replaced by Tiberius, again, his brother Tiberius. People know Tiberius is like people forget, like, Tiberius was as an emperor was a weirdo. He wasn't the best emperor. He didn't really care, honestly. Like, he really did not care about being emperor. He was lazy for a large part of his reign. But aside from that, he was actually a great general, and so he replaced Drusus in Germania, and he began campaigning, again, having more success, doing a great job. And then Tiberius got replaced by another general called Ahenobarbus, and it's just like this whole carousel of generals. They're just swapping in and out for the next few years until 6 AD, where the Romans considered Germania completely pacified. So now that they believe that Germania is pacified, they want to be in the process of integrating it into the Roman Empire. And so how do they do this? Well, one of the big parts of integrating it is appointing a governor. So Augustus decided to appoint a guy called Varus to be the governor of Germania. And as you all know, as I mentioned earlier in the video, Varus is the infamous general that lost the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. However, I also want to examine who Varus was, what kind of person was he, etc., which we're going to get into right now. So Varus again came from a pretty irrelevant family. They had an aristocratic lineage, but honestly, they weren't really that relevant in Roman politics. It was actually Varus who kind of made them relevant. Varus, again, I'm telling you, Varus was a smart guy. He was competent. Like, he was a pretty important member of Augustus' inner circle. Like, he went with Augustus. Like, he accompanied Augustus on a 3-year tour of the eastern provinces in 22 BC. He married the daughter of Agrippa, which, by the way, if you know Roman history, I'll just give you guys a quick little just piece of info. Agrippa was basically Augustus' right-hand man. He was Augustus' top general. He won pretty much all of Augustus' battles for him. Like, basically, Augustus wouldn't become emperor if it wasn't for Agrippa. Agrippa did a lot of the heavy lifting for him. And Agrippa was a major architect. He designed the Pantheon in Rome. He designed a lot of Rome's sewers. Like, he was basically going to become the emperor after Augustus. Like, he was Augustus' best friend. So the fact that Varus married the daughter of Agrippa, the second most powerful man in the empire, says a lot. And then on top of that, Varus became consul, which is a big deal, right? Became the governor of Africa, again, another big deal, because Africa is important for Rome's grain supply. So Varus was playing a big role in feeding Rome. That's kind of important. And then he became the governor of Syria, an even more important position because Syria had 3 legions. The governor of Syria had 3 legions under his command, and he had to deal with the Parthian border. And again, another fact check, another piece of info. Parthia was one of Rome's top rivals, if not probably Rome's biggest rival during this period of time. Parthia was like a Persian empire. It was not the Persian empire that you think about like the movie 300. It's like a different Persian empire, but they were very powerful polity, no doubt about it. So he again had an important governorship. Now the problem with Varus was that, and why I kind of want to blame Augustus here, Augustus deserves some blame, is that Varus really didn't have a lot of military experience. Like, he put down a revolt in Judea, but he wasn't a general at the same, he wasn't the same level of general as Drusus the Elder or Tiberius, not even close, right? Varus was just a governor. He was an administrator. You know what I mean? So, I mean, the mere fact, obviously, that I'm going to keep reiterating this, the fact that Augustus appointed him in such an important position matters a lot, right? That speaks a lot to his ability. I mean, he's the first guy to integrate and Romanize and tame Germania, right? That's a big deal. But again, Germania is a lot different than Syria, right? It's not an urbanized province. It's forests, it's woods, it's tribes. It's like literally like the Wild West, right? So it's another ballgame. So Augustus, I think, screwed up by appointing Varus as governor. But I just want to hammer that point home. Varus was genuinely just a competent guy, and I think just slandered by Augustan historians. Alright, now let's cover the Germanic peoples. So the Germanic peoples, simply put, there were just a ton of them, right? They were spread out all over Europe. They were found in modern-day Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, Belgium, parts of Poland, Austria, and the Czech Republic. They were found everywhere. They spoke a type of language known as Proto-Germanic. We don't really have much evidence of it. It's kind of an unknown language. Well, it is an unknown language. We just don't have any written evidence of it, but linguists can reconstruct it. On top of that, the Germanic peoples would do human sacrifices. Tacitus wrote about this when Roman troops were captured after the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. We also have archaeological evidence. There are these things called bog bodies, where basically these bodies were put into bogs. They were, put there on purpose, and the findings from these bogs show that the bodies were remarkably well preserved, and they have all these bodies from 800 BC to 200 CE. So yeah, they would also sacrifice weapons too. Yeah, it's just interesting, the whole aspect of human sacrifice. I find interesting. Yeah. So the Germanic peoples would practice that, and outside of the religion, the Germanic peoples also, I think, had a really unique government, I would say. So again, it really varied across each tribe. Not all tribes was going to be the same, obviously, in terms of government, but one kind of consistent thing with all of the Germanic tribes was that they had a thing. So this is a real thing. It's called the thing or a thing, it was a parliament of some sort. It was like, more accurately, it's like a tribal council, right? So this was a place where all free adult males could gather, and they basically discussed all the major decisions that the tribe had to undertake. It involved everything: laws, social events, trade, economic stuff, literally everything. It wasn't supremely democratic, right? Because the tribal chiefs would decide the agenda of like what they were going to talk about that day at the thing, but the way that ideas were discussed and the way that ideas were decided upon was not based on your rank or your level of wealth. It was based off of how well you could actually persuade people and make an argument. So it was definitely more meritocratic, more democratic compared to other forms of government, obviously like the Roman Empire, right? So I love, the thing is really interesting. It's still around today. For example, in Iceland, their thing was established in 930 AD, and so it's one of the oldest parliaments in the world. You can Google it. It's a thing. It's a real concept. Now let's also examine how Germanic tribes fought. So they were different than the Gauls in a way, because they were kind of more like skirmishers. Like the Gaul was more developed. It was just like, basically it was more urbanized compared to Germania. So the Germanic peoples fought in a more, I guess, like guerrilla style of warfare. Like they used a framea. Framea, it's a type of spear, but could also function as a javelin. So again, it features in the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. They would use these spears again to either throw them as a javelin or to stab. Obviously, so they're versatile. On top of that, the average Germanic soldier did not have access to armor. First of all, this is actually reserved for wealthier warriors only, not for your average Joe Schmo Germanic warrior. And so usually they'd either wear a tunic, or the Germanic soldiers would actually fight naked. On top of that, the Germanic troops would obviously fight against the Romans in open battle, but again, as I told you, guerrilla warfare, ambushing. The Germanic tribes like to use the terrain and the geography of Germania to their advantage to defeat the Romans. So again, Teutoburg Forest is a major example of this. Even Drusus the Elder, as I mentioned before, when he was actually fighting in Germania and in his campaigns, one of his battles involved the Germanic tribes ambushing him. He was able to survive and escape the ambush, but again, they like to, the Germans like to ambush, the Germanic peoples like to ambush their enemies, the Romans. So moving on from the Germanic style of warfare, let's talk about who Arminius was. Arminius was born in 18 BC. He was the son of Segamir, who was a chief of the Cherusci tribe. Arminius was brought up in Roman culture along with his brother Flavius. They were actually, the reason why they grew up in Roman culture is because they were, some speculate, they were hostages. His father, Segamir, surrendered his brother and Arminius to the Romans as hostages to secure peace. And so because of this experience, Arminius became a Roman citizen. He was able to speak Latin. He studied the Roman way of warfare. He became an equite, which was like the second highest social class in Roman society behind a senator. And most interestingly as well, he fought alongside the Roman army during the Great Illyrian Revolt, which was like this huge, the name implies it, it's great. It was a massive revolt in the modern day Balkans. We're talking Albania, Croatia, Bosnia, that whole part of Europe. It was a huge revolt amongst the Illyrian peoples, and it really threatened Rome. And I'll talk about the revolt later on in the video, because it actually plays a big role in what happened at Teutoburg Forest. So anyway, Arminius fought as a Roman cavalryman during the Great Illyrian Revolt in 6 AD, and then he eventually left Illyria, went back to Germania in 8 AD to assist Varus with governing Germania. Because again, right, Arminius was of Germanic origin, but he grew up in Roman culture, so he was kind of, he had a bicultural sort of identification. You know what I mean? Bicultural worldview. He could be an ambassador to both cultures and peoples. Now I'm also going to answer this question as well. I'm sure some of you guys are wondering, why did Arminius betray Rome? There are a few reasons. I mean, the two big reasons, simply put, is he just felt like Varus's rule over his people was too brutal. He thought Varus was being unfair to his people. He didn't treat his people as equal, so he didn't like that. That's the first reason why he wanted to betray them. And secondly, straight up, Arminius was a Germanic patriot. He loved his people more than he loved the Romans. It's that simple. And again, we can speculate even more. Do we know when exactly he turned? When exactly he betrayed Rome and became a double agent? We don't know. We can speculate. Maybe during the Illyrian Revolt, he saw how heavy-handed, how brutal the Romans were in putting down the revolt, and the way that they, their conduct towards these rebels, the brutality. He worried that maybe his people would suffer the same fate if they were conquered by Rome. Maybe it happened during the Great Illyrian Revolt, or maybe it happened when he was in Germania. He saw how Varus was governing his people. He said, enough's enough. I don't like the way you're treating my people. I'm gonna turn my back against Rome and betray you guys. So I don't know, when did it start? It's so many different, things to speculate. We just don't know enough information. But yeah, I hope I provided you guys with enough context. Let's now dive into the actual event itself. Now that we've finally reached the section of the video where I can actually cover the event itself, before I actually get into the nitty-gritty details of the event, I want to mention one more thing. The Great Illyrian Revolt, which I mentioned before in Arminius's biographical section. The Great Illyrian Revolt is important because before the Great Illyrian Revolt broke out, there was actually a much larger Roman military presence in Germania. Because when Arminius attacked the Teutoburg forest, the Romans famously had 3 legions, which was around 20,000 troops. But before, the Romans actually had an army that was 4 times that size at 80,000 troops. And the Romans were actually going to be mounting an invasion into the territory of the Marcomanni, which were another Germanic tribe in like modern-day Czech Republic. And they're trying to defeat the king of the Marcomanni, Marobodus, however you pronounce it. He has a weird name. Anyway, they were gonna, mount this another full-scale invasion in Germania, attack more Germanic tribes, try and pacify Germania more. But because of the Great Illyrian Revolt, which broke out in 6 AD, the same revolt that Arminius fought in, it was such a huge revolt, and it was such a major threat to Rome, the city itself, because you actually look at the geography of the Roman Empire. You have Italy, the Adriatic Sea, and then Illyria. So the only thing that was separating Italy and Illyria was the Adriatic Sea. And the Adriatic Sea is not a super wide body of water. So Rome, the city itself, was low-key under threat. So the Romans had to send a lot of those troops from Germania into Illyria to put the revolt down. So that gave Arminius the perfect opportunity for him to strike and attack the Romans in Germania. And so, yeah, that's why it's important. That's why I wanted to mention it. Because basically, Teutoburg Forest might have been delayed, or it might have never even have happened if it wasn't for the Great Illyrian Revolt. So anyway, now, finally, we can actually get into the nitty-gritty details of the event. So right here, this is what I've been filming. This is basically my recreation of the Roman camp, because basically the first act of Arminius's plan was to actually have the Romans encamp in his territory, in his people's territory, in the Etruscan territory. He wanted it to be like a sign of friendship. You can get along. It was supposed to be like he portrayed it to Varus as like, we're gonna bond, I guess. Like you're gonna be able to bond, interact with the locals. Like it's gonna be like a nice cultural synthesis. Like it was also like we're hosting the Romans. You know what I mean? It was the Romans were like guests. You know what I mean? He was trying to portray it as a kind gesture. When in reality, what Arminius was trying to do was he was actually trying to spy on the Romans. He was trying to gather intel. You know what I mean? On how many troops they had, what kind of equipment did they have. Like it was actually a full-on he was scouting them for the entire summer. That was the plan. So if you can look at the diorama I have here, this right here, the hotels are the Roman walls. This is the camp basically. This is Varus. These are the Roman troops. This is Arminius, and this is like the Germanic Cherusci village. So now, while Arminius was planning his ambush and formulating his plan, the star right here, that's Patrick Star, whatever, just a star, gummy star. He snitches on Varus. Now, what's the name of this star? His name is Segestes. Segestes is a member of the Cherusci tribe. He's a chieftain. And Segestes found out about Arminius' plan. He snitched to Varus. Varus did not listen to Segestes. Now, why did Varus not listen? Well, because Varus knew that Segestes hated Arminius because Arminius was married to Segestes' daughter. So we thought that Segestes was basically trying to slander Arminius, give him a bad name, and basically try and, get rid of a political and personal rival. That's why Varus didn't listen to him, because he thought it was all slander, and he trusted Arminius more. Also because, again, Arminius was a Roman citizen, spoke Latin, was pretty much a Roman, essentially. So, yeah, it's kind of crazy. Varus knew about the plan, but he didn't listen to Segestes. And honestly, I don't completely blame Varus for not listening. Yeah, it's kind of all slander, if you gotta trust a guy. Segestes is just any other Germanic chieftain, while Arminius is basically a Roman. Yeah, and he knew about all the tea between Arminius and Segestes' daughter. So, yeah. Anyway, so Arminius was in the clear. Varus didn't listen to Segestes. And so now, Arminius was going to lure the Romans into a trap. This is what he's trying to do. He wanted to lure them along this path, set the Romans up, and basically remove the Romans' advantage. How would Arminius do this? He basically came up with a false rumor, a false revolt. He claimed that there was a revolt breaking out in the northwest among a Germanic tribe known as the Angrivari. And he told Varus that, hey, you need to put down this revolt. But the problem is, the Romans were encamping here during the summer. This camp was their summer camp. They needed to go back, they needed to march back further west to their winter camp. But Arminius gave him this idea. Hey, Varus, you can put down the Angrivari revolt, and you can put down the Angrivari revolt, and you can come back to your winter camp. Best of both worlds. But if you want to do this, we're going to take you down a path, a shortcut. Now, see where I'm going with this? This quote-unquote shortcut was the path where Arminius could ambush the Romans, trap them, and take away their advantage. This is where he would basically execute his plan. It was brilliant. I'm telling you, Arminius is like a military genius. Like, seriously. Creating a fake revolt and then leading down a path that was designed with traps, and he had his troops located there. All this stuff. It was brilliantly planned. And so, on the morning of September 7th, 9 AD, the Roman army was ready to move out. So while the Roman army was ready to move out along this path that Arminius recommended to Varus, before they were ready to move out, Arminius told Varus, hey bro, I'm going to be gone for a few days. I need to gather all the Cherusci auxiliary troops that were kind of scattered across, different settlements throughout Germania, and he was going to be back and rejoining the Roman army in 2 or 3 days. Now, Varus didn't really find this suspicious because it really took, a while to gather all these troops, again, because there was, sparsely spread out. So this was also the last time Arminius and Varus would see each other, or more like interact with each other face to face, and the last time that the Romans would see Arminius as, well, a member of their team, a member of the Roman military. And so, in actuality, Arminius wasn't riding out to meet with and gather Cherusci auxiliaries. No. He was actually meeting with other Germanic tribes that were co-conspirators in his revolt against the Romans, and it was basically meant to gather troops, bring them along here into the tree line, and position them to attack Varus and the Roman column. It's now September 8th, and the Roman army is making its way through the trail to put down the Angrivari revolt. However, the problem with the trail that they're currently walking on, it's extremely wooded and heavily forested. Because of this, and because of just how awkward the trail is, this interrupts the Roman army's cohesion. The Roman troops aren't really as packed, and they aren't as united. So they're being spread out and divided, and troops are becoming more and more isolated. The column reached an upwards of 12 miles. So this is exactly what Arminius wants, to disrupt the Roman army's cohesion, and that makes them vulnerable to attack. And that is exactly what happened, with Germanic tribesmen emerging from the tree line, and they began harassing Roman troops with spears. However, while the Romans could not respond to these attacks because the Germanic tribesmen were attacking them from all angles and using the tree line effectively to hide their movements, the Romans only took light casualties, and they were able to successfully reach this open plot of land to set up a camp. Now Varus and the Romans have successfully established their camp. The first thing that Varus does is set up a war council with himself and all the top Roman officers to decide the next best course of action for the Roman army. They decide to send 2 scouting parties. The first scouting party is supposed to go ahead of the army and scout out the rest of the trail to make sure that it's safe for the Romans to traverse upon. The other scouting party right here is going back across the trail that the Romans have already traversed. Their goal is to find Arminius and link up with the Cherusci auxiliary cavalry. So on the morning of September 9th, the scouting parties departed the camp. Here's what happened to the parties. The forward scouting party successfully made it back to camp. They informed Varus that the trail was being blocked, right here with these 2 pieces of broccoli, by felled trees. The rear scouting party that was supposed to meet up with Arminius and the Cherusci auxiliaries was nowhere to be found. With this information in hand, Varus decided to abandon the camp, push forward along the trail, and leave the wounded behind. As the Romans began their second march, leaving their old camp, they began to be harassed by Germanic tribesmen again. The losses were starting to mount for the Romans, and the situation was becoming increasingly dire. Thankfully for the Romans, they were able to achieve some respite, finding an open patch of land and setting up another camp. The Romans have now set up their secondary camp, and Varus is realizing that the situation is becoming increasingly more dire and desperate. To resolve the situation, Varus orders his cavalry commander, Mnemonius Valla, right there, to leave the rest of the army, ride out to the Rhine River, alert the garrisons, and also contact the Phrygian tribe for support. Now, as Valla's cavalry army is about to exit the camp, Arminius and his Cherusci auxiliaries emerge from the forest. What do you think happens next? Well, Arminius starts attacking Vala's cavalry regiment and destroys it. And now Varus has fully realized what he's gotten himself into. Varus witnesses Arminius completely annihilate this Roman cavalry detachment. And to make matters even worse, the old camp that I mentioned earlier, Arminius had his troops sneak into this camp and completely massacre all of the wounded troops. Now Varus, what do we do next? Now, what does Varus decide to do? After realizing that Arminius betrayed him, Varus, he unalives himself. Yeah. Him and a bunch of other officers, they all unalive themselves, and the Roman army is pretty much left leaderless. As I said previously, the Romans are in trouble. But again, not all is lost. 2 officers emerge. They're going to lead the Roman army. One, right here, the red turtle, that's Chionius. This guy, Aegeus. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Aegeus, I think. These 2 guys decided to split the Roman army in half and lead them out of the forest. Aegeus and his half of the army were the first to leave the camp. While they weren't ambushed right as they exited the camp, they walked themselves into a trap. As you can see here, these are felled trees blocking the pathway of the trail. Right here is a bog that is not navigable. And right here on the Calcrisa hill, which is, it's a bowl by the way, this is a bowl. The Germans built a palisade to block their exit via this hill. Aegeus walked his troops into a kill zone. Now a lot's happened, let me break it down for you guys. So Aegeus decides to attack the wall. Chionius and his men leave the camp. However, unlike Aegeus, Chionius and his men get instantly ambushed right as they leave the camp by Arminius and his troops. The result of this engagement between Chionius' detachment and Arminius' army was complete and utter annihilation for Chionius. Some people did survive and they did make their way back to Aegeus, but Aegeus' attack on the palisade failed. Now all Aegeus had the men do was try and get around the palisade at this point, go for broke, and just try and escape. Not even try and fight their way out, just run for your life. Unfortunately, this failed. Arminius and his men came from behind and completely encircled the Romans and wiped them out. And so the Romans were completely and utterly defeated. And as a result, this battle was a complete humiliation for Rome. They lost 3 legionary eagles, and those legionary eagles are going to be an important part in the aftermath of this battle because that's going to be one of the top priorities of the Roman army. It's because they're going to be back in Germania. They're going to fight Arminius, and they're going to try their best to get those eagles back because, yeah, if you really want to piss off the Roman army, you take their eagles. And then secondly, the soldiers who did survive the battle some actually did survive and live and like made it back to Roman garrisons on the Rhine. Others straight up were just captured and then used in human sacrifice rituals. So yeah, really, again, very infamous defeat for Rome, very bad, but again, not a killing blow. As I said, the Romans will be back, and I'm going to cover that now in the aftermath section of this video. In the immediate aftermath of the battle, Arminius had his men wipe out the rest of the Roman presence east of the Rhine, and Arminius almost successfully pulled this off, except the few Roman troops at a fort known as Aliso were able to actually escape and make it back to the larger Roman forces stationed on the Rhine. Now, while Arminius basically mopped up and cleaned up all the Roman troops in Germania, news obviously reached Rome, and Augustus did not react very well to the defeat at Teutoburg Forest. Some people, actually, I feel like quite a lot of people know this story. This is quite a famous story. When Augustus found out, he started yelling, Varus, give me back my legions. And it actually, I just found out about this while researching this video. According to Suetonius, in his The Lives of the 12 Caesars, he said that Augustus did not cut his hair or his beard for months. And so he basically had one of the most valid crash outs in all of history, to be honest with you. So yeah, I don't blame Augustus. And well, Augustus eventually recovered, as did Rome, and they got their lick back, no doubt. It's kind of ironic. I just watched the Super Bowl, and the Seahawks got revenge on the Patriots, and I feel like I saw that Marshawn Lynch commercial. I'm like, always good to get your lick back, nothing better. And I'm like, dude, the Romans must have felt that a little bit. Were the Romans the Seahawks, and the Patriots were the Germanic people to some extent? You know how I do see it though? Arminius was Al Qaeda, was Bin Laden, and Germanicus was Jessica Chastain in 0 Dark 30, and he was trying to hunt down Arminius. Anyway, I'm really just yapping right now, but basically, back to what I was saying. So Augustus crashed out, as we know, and 13 AD, 4 years later, after Teutoburg Forest, Germanicus was going to do Germanicus things in Germania, and so he was the commander. He was appointed as the commander of all Roman forces in the Rhine. And so, as I said before, Germanicus is the son of Drusus. Remember the general from earlier, who I mentioned that was the first Roman general to enter Germania and really did a great job fighting against the Germanic peoples. Was the first to reach the Elbe River, all that, and kind of a full circle moment. His son now was going into Germania to get revenge for Rome. Anyway, so sorry, I'm just trying to scroll here. I got my notes here. Germanicus, again, is a really cool figure of Roman history. He's the nephew of Tiberius. He's the father of Agrippina the Younger. He's the grandfather of Nero. And I feel like most notably, he's actually the father of Caligula. And the name Caligula is actually a nickname. It's not his real name. The reason why he actually earned this nickname, interestingly enough, is because Caligula accompanied his father on his campaigns in Germania. And so when he was at the Roman camps, the soldiers loved interacting with Caligula because he would dress up like a little soldier. Like he was like a 4-year-old, 5-year-old kid, like a toddler, and he was dressing up as like a little Roman soldier. So they began calling him Caligula, which in Latin means little boot. So a little fun fact right there, these Germanic campaigns that Germanicus embarked on sparked the nickname Caligula. So anyway, Germanicus is in charge in 1380. 1480, Augustus, he's not around anymore. He's dead. And then Tiberius becomes emperor. So Tiberius again plays a big role in this relationship with Germanicus. I'll go into that in more detail. Anyway, Germanicus' intended goal with this campaign in Germania is to, first of all, restore Rome's honor, which is basically getting those eagles. They got to recapture those 3 eagles. That's a big part of this campaign. And then obviously wiping out every single tribe that was involved with the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. That was in Arminius' coalition, so to speak. And so Germanicus, for the next 2 years, just smashes the Germans, just beats them battle after battle. He captures Thusnelda. I don't know if you guys remember. Just a little bit of a circle back moment. Let's circle back to this. Thusnelda was the daughter of Segestes. Segestes was the guy that hated Arminius, that snitched to Varus and told Varus, "Hey dude, Arminius is planning this whole ambush," and Varus didn't listen to him. Well, now Germanicus captured Thusnelda, captured that woman, the daughter of Segestes. And Arminius was depressed. It did not help. He was not happy about this at all when Germanicus captured Thusnelda. And then Germanicus actually fought Arminius. They fought one-on-one, not one-on-one literally, but their armies faced each other at the Battle of Idis Tavizo, and Germanicus won. And he also beat Arminius at the Battle of Angrivarian Wall. Again, another battle where Germanicus beat Arminius. And again, another circle back moment. Angrivarian Wall, Angrivari, that was the tribe I told you about earlier. That was the tribe that Arminius came up with the false allegation that there was a revolt, and that lured Varus into the trap that Arminius set for him. Also, back to the eagles, as I mentioned, Germanicus was trying to recover those eagles. Germanicus recovered 2 of the 3 stolen eagles. The third one was actually recovered in 41 AD by some random general. His name was Publius Gabienus. That's the only really notable thing he did, but he made him quite popular. He actually, I think, got a triumph for doing that. No, I feel the coolest part of Germanicus' story. I really am talking way too much about Germanicus. I find it so interesting. I want to do a whole video on him and Drusus the Elder, but there's a whole full circle moment. I've said that so many times, but it's true. He visited the site of the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, and he buried the remains of the troops that died there. There were skeletons there, and he buried them. They paid respect. They had a whole ceremony, showing their respects, and he actually had survivors from the battle accompany him to the site, and they're showing him what happened and all that. It's some crazy, something you see in a movie. It's a crazy story. So he really, Germanicus, he really, really avenged Rome. Seriously, really avenged Rome. And and this obviously made him extremely popular. Germanicus became, massive celebrity in Rome, and he was next in line to become emperor. But obviously Tiberius didn't like this, and he became jealous of Germanicus. And Tiberius recalled Germanicus 16 AD, which Tacitus, who, by the way, I'll just straight up tell you guys, Tacitus is an important part of this video for me, because Tacitus, a lot of the sources about the Germanic peoples and just about this battle come from Tacitus, because he wrote a book called Germania. And so Tacitus was frustrated by Germanicus being recalled, because Tacitus believed that if Germanicus did one more campaign, he could have conquered all of Germania. But anyway, Tiberius recalled him because of jealousy. Germanicus was becoming too popular. But at the same time, to be fair to Tiberius, he did recall Germanicus because he was unpopular. But at the same time, the Romans didn't really need. There was really no need for them to occupy Germania and to make it a province because it just wasn't really worth it. Germania was too poor, and to be honest, with credit and fairness to the Germanic peoples, they fought really hard. And Teutoburg Forest again kind of spooked the Romans. Like they knew they could win, but at what cost? Was it worth it? You know what I mean? Were you getting a good ROI? And so, yeah, if Teutoburg Forest didn't happen, if it didn't spook the Romans as much, history would look different. You know what I mean? And I'll go into that later in another section of the video, which is going to be the larger ramifications and effects. I'm not going to get there yet, but yes, I'll get there. And then Arminius. What happened to Arminius? Honestly, it had a pretty anticlimactic end. Germanicus didn't get to kill him. There was no crazy ancient Roman, SEAL Team 6 raid. No, straight up, he just got killed by members of his own tribe. He was just poisoned in 21 AD. We don't know who did it. We don't know too many details. We just believe that what we do know, historians speculate, is that he basically just became way too tyrannical for the tribe. He became too, power hungry, and so they didn't like that, and so they killed him. And yeah, again, a little bit disappointing. I know. I think we all wanted an epic clash between Germanicus and Arminius. A 1v1 literal duel didn't happen. So yeah, let's actually now dive into, as I mentioned earlier, the larger ramifications and effects that this battle had on world history. Alright, now let's examine the larger ramifications and effects that this battle had on world history. So first of all, again, it played a big role in stopping Roman expansion. It spooked them, as I said. If Teutoburg Forest doesn't happen, and again, this is 100% speculation, but I'm just spitballing, I'm brainstorming, let's have fun here, right? If it does not happen, right, there's a higher chance that the Romans are going to stay longer in Germania, right? If the Romans stay longer, and that means they're going to Romanize the province more. They're going to integrate it into their empire. There's a higher chance of that happening. Germania's going to look more like Gaul, right? And so if Germania looks more like Gaul, Gaul is modern-day France, what happens to the German language, right? Is it even going to be part of the Germanic language family? Is it going to be considered part of the Romance language family? You know what I mean? But therefore, could low-key change what happens to English, right? Assuming, right, the Anglo-Saxon migration still happened, right? Because they migrated from modern-day Germany. Some of them did. The Saxons did, at least. They come to England, right? That kind of changes the English language. Is it more of a Romance language? Most likely, right? Because the Romans rule over it. And outside of just the linguistic changes, the linguistic differences, I mean, obviously the legal system is going to be different, based more on the Romans, right? There's going to be more Roman sites. You know what I mean? Like France still has a lot of Roman sites. Romania, I mean, think about Romania was what I feel like is an interesting example. I want to know more about this, but think about it. Romania only became part of the Roman Empire in 106 AD, right? They were kind of a late bloomer compared to Gaul, right? And it's interesting because Romania was kind of cut off from other parts of Europe and other parts of the empire. It's kind of a backwater compared to Gaul, but they still retained a Latin language. I really want to actually make a video about that now, thinking about it, examining the Romanian language. It's actually so interesting. So could that happen with Germania? If the Romans had that much of an impact on a linguistic system and making a language like Romania into Latin, when Romania had Roman influence, but not as much as Gaul. Anyway, it's just something to think about. And so, yeah, anyway, that's the whole language thing I wanted to touch on, the effects of Teutoburg Force again. And then, honestly, let's talk about Arminius. Arminius, his effect on German history. It's interesting because a lot of people in Germany didn't really know who Arminius was. They only really found out about the guy in the 1400s, during the Renaissance. Because basically, during the Renaissance period, obviously the Renaissance started in Italy, and a lot of these Italians were very proud of these ancient Romans, right? Cicero, Caesar, all these people. The Germans didn't really have anyone until they discovered about until they learned about Tacitus's annals. I was about to say that word, annals, and they began to view him as a hero. They finally had an ancient hero that they could look up to, right? The Italians had those ancient heroes. The Greeks had those ancient heroes. Now they finally had their own ancient hero, and so they viewed him as a patriot, as a guy who stopped basically Roman imperialism and preserved, good old-fashioned Germanic culture. And Arminius, again, saw another surge in popularity during the 1800s because, again, context, the 1800s, Germany was trying to unify, right? Otto von Bismarck, Franco-Prussian War, this whole thing, right? Arminius was seen as a symbol of German unification and patriotism and pride. And so in 1875, there was a monument dedicated to Arminius known as the Hermannsdenkmal, or the Hermann Memorial. And by the way, I should also mention, in Germany he's known as Hermann. They don't call him Arminius. How do I put it? It's like a joyful, it's like a nickname kind of. Somewhat, I believe it's a nickname. Yeah, it's a nickname. They call him Hermann. But then eventually Arminius' popularity kind of waned. It's actually interesting if you look at, so after the defeat of the Nazis in World War II, right? So West Germany, Arminius wasn't really too popular because he was too associated with the old regime, the Nazi regime, because the Nazis really pushed Arminius, right? Ancient Germanic pride, all that. On the other hand, in East Germany, he actually was very popular because he was seen as a symbol of like a communist, like he was a socialist Spartacus-esque hero that freed the Germans from the Romans, who were seen as like the East German education system saw the Romans as like evil slave owners, like evil imperialist slave owners. So Arminius was like, yeah, again, a communist hero. Nowadays in Germany, Arminius is like a pretty much a universally celebrated hero. I wouldn't say he's like the biggest, most well-known German figure, but he's definitely a respected and revered figure all across Germany, for sure. And so, yeah, thank you guys for watching. Before I end my video, I want to tell you guys a cool little story about the Battle of Teutoburg. Just one cool little story, one little cool anecdote. This is crazy again. This is beauty of history. As I mentioned, some soldiers survived. In 50 AD, right? Battle took place in 9 AD. 50 AD, right? 41 years after, a general named Publius Pomponius Secundus defeated the Chatti tribe, which were one of the tribes that were involved in Arminius' coalition, found a group of enslaved soldiers that had survived Teutoburg Forest and freed them. 41 years of enslavement in the forests of Germania. 41 years. Crazy. Insanity, and he freed them. What a story. What a story. So, yeah, thank you guys all for watching. And, yeah, it was a pleasure making this video. I had a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. I hope I can make my videos better. Yeah, so I'm trying to aspire to do better. Please give me guys your feedback. I want to hear it. Please be brutally honest. I really want to do better. This was just something really experimental. I wanted to try something new, different. I know it's not my best content, but yeah, I'm going to try and do better. I really want to try and do better and experiment more. So yeah, thank you guys all for watching. You guys have a great day.